11 years of having no toilet in the house and using an outhouse to 11 years owning a business. Hey there, Coach Devin here. So an interesting thing, I've owned a gym now for 11 years. It was 11 years on Monday. And, it's funny, when you start a business, you don't think about what's going to happen 11 years later. You don't think pandemics for sure. That's not something you think of. But you also, you don't really think of the big picture of stuff. You just are going to work because you need to make money and grinding away, and it slowly grows over time and all those things. So my friend Wayne Crawley made a comment to me about the other day when we were training together, and he says, how long have you owned the business? But we're just talking business, right? I mean, he's a super interesting guy. And so when you're talking business with somebody like Wayne Crawley or my friend Craig Sampson, those guys are awesome to talk business to, always interesting. And he said to me, how long have you owned the business? And I said, 11 years. It's been 11 years now. And he said, oh, that's interesting. And I don't know how, but somehow we moved from that topic to growing up. And he said, I don't know how we got on that topic. I honestly don't remember. But I made a comment. I said, well, for the first 11 years of my life, we had an outhouse. Like, we didn't have an indoor toilet. And Wayne looks at me like I have two heads. Like, what? And I said, yeah, we had an outhouse when I was a kid. And he said, you had an outhouse? Like, no toilet? And I'm like, yeah, we didn't have a toilet. We had an outhouse when I was a kid. And I continued with whatever the story was I was telling. I don't know what the story was, to be honest. I can't recall. And he said, how long have you owned this business again? I said, 11 years. He's like, so you lived in a house with an outhouse. You used an outhouse for 11 years, and now you've owned a business for 11 years. That's kind of a crazy story. And what's interesting about that is it never crossed my mind that those two things lined up at all. Obviously they wouldn't have lined up before I owned the business 11 years. That wouldn't work. But it just never ever crossed my mind that, it's weird or different that I grew up in a family that had an outhouse. And what is funny, and I probably need to explain the story a little better. My mom and dad were, upper middle class in Chicago, and they decided they wanted to move to Canada. And they had two sons at that point. I was a baby, and my brother was 5. And my dad's ex-military. They didn't like the way the U.S. was going. They wanted to move to Canada. So that's how we end up in Cape Breton. My mom and dad picked Canada, and they picked the East Coast, and my dad drives up, decides Cape Breton Island sounds good, and that's where we grew up. So my parents made the decision to move to a farm, become farmers, and there's no money in farming if you're doing that kind of farming. There's not money in that. And I grew up, really keenly aware that we didn't have money. And to my mom and dad, they're like, who cares? Because they liked the lifestyle. They liked where they were. They were happy with it. And that's cool for them. But for me, it kind of created this internal drive that I'm like, I have to make money. It really did. And I always felt, there was a lot of pressure for me that I needed to do this damn thing. I need to make some money. But what is very funny about the whole situation to me now, looking at it, and I'm trying to look at it from the outside, like looking at it as a real thing. Like, okay, I own a business now, but I own, an outhouse. I lived in a house with an outhouse. That, I guess, and it's funny because you don't think about it, but it's kind of a really, and I wouldn't say rags to riches because I'm not rich. Let's be clear. I'm not rich. But I've done okay, I guess. I have staff, and we're open 11 years later. 90+% of businesses close within 2 years or 3 years, something insane. I don't know what the number is exactly, but it's high. It's high. I remember when I crossed the 5-year threshold, people said to me, who own businesses, said to me, wow, you know what? That's a big deal. And I was like, okay, maybe. I didn't really think about it. To me, there's no option that you can fail. You just got to go. And it was sort of like my good friend Chris Villardo said to me one day something about being successful. And I said, well, I don't know how successful I am. I have a living. So my friend Chris Villardo says, dude, businesses don't last that long. Like, when you say successful, you mean the business is open. That's successful when you push comes to shove. Having the business being open, that is a success. So it's funny because I've never considered myself a success, right? I've never considered myself anything special. I don't have a big head. I was raised to, be, humble and do hard work. I'm a little bit yappy. I'm loud. I'm very loud. But, I'm not, I was raised to put in work and not yap about it too much. I yap about it a little bit, but you know what I mean? I'm not arrogant about it. So what's interesting is to look back and to see it from the outside, like my friend Wayne said, to go from a house that had no toilet. And I mean no toilet. We had no toilet. We had an outhouse, and we went to the outhouse to use the bathroom. I was petrified as a kid to go to the outhouse. It was awful. My brother actually told me a creature lived underneath the outhouse, and if I stayed on the toilet for too long, it would come get me. I'm not kidding. And then he dipped his hands. You can't make this stuff up. He found tractor oil, dipped his hands in the tractor oil, and he flipped the seat up in the outhouse and put handprints on the bottom of the seat. So when I came out next time, there'd be handprints to scare the hell out of me. I was going to say scare the crap out of me, but that would be too much of a pun. Yeah. Anyway, he actually did that. Thank you, Thane, for doing that. So it is kind of when I look back on that from the outside, like what Wayne said, it's kind of it is kind of amazing to come from this little tiny place in Cape Breton, with not a ton of money growing up, hand-me-down clothing, and no toilet, to owning a business and having staff and stuff like that. I quite often shake my head and go, how the heck did I manage to get to a place where I have staff? People depend on me for a job. How did that happen? I think that quite often. But it is kind of an interesting story. But you know what? It's funny. You don't think of yourself in that manner. You don't ever cross your mind that you're that guy. You think you're just an average person. I always think of everybody growing up without toilets. I'm not even kidding. I don't think of, people growing up differently than me. I just feel like that's the way people grew up, living on a back road on a farm and getting up at 6 a.m. to feed, chickens and pigs and stuff like that, and having chores after work and after school rather, and all that stuff. I just feel like that was normal. And not having a toilet is part of that. So it's kind of a cool thing. And sometimes it makes you take a step back and say, wait a second, I've done okay. I may not be rocking it. I'm not certainly not perfect. I'm not a finished product, but that's kind of a cool story. Anyway, let me know what you think of it. I've actually 11 years of having no toilet in the house and using an outhouse, to 11 years owning a business. That's kind of actually cool. Have yourself a great day, everybody. Don't fight the awesome.